Your name came up during the recent Karen Reed trial. You got
Now, she referenced Commissioner Michael Cox in her testimony. So today what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at a time when Commissioner Cox was interviewed by a reporter. It's only a couple questions, but man, do we get a lot of information from this really short interaction here. Hey everybody, welcome back to Truth Revealed. I'm Sergio Denaro. Today we are going to take a look at Boston Police Commissioner Michael A. Cox. Now, if you remember from the Karen Reed trial, Officer Kelly Dever testified towards the end. Her testimony was, let's just say, it was riddled with problems, inconsistencies, and deception. I want to start this off by saying that I normally don't go super in-depth on microexpressions. I was trained in microexpressions. I took the course that Paul Ekman put together. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play the question for you. During the question, you're going to see a ton of microexpressions. Commissioner Cox is very expressive. He's the definition of wearing your emotions on your sleeve. He makes a lot of facial expressions. And so it makes it very easy for us to go through and see exactly what he's thinking while he's being interviewed. I'm going to play some clips so that you can see the question being asked and you can pay attention to Commissioner Cox's facial expressions while the questions are being asked, because you're going to see a bunch of different facial expressions before the question's even done. So we're going to look at the question, and then we're going to analyze his facial expressions, and then we're going to listen to the answer, and then we're going to look at his verbiage, and then we're going to marry up. How do the micro expressions marry up with the verbiage that he gives you? All right, so let's listen to this first question.
your name came up during the recent Karen Reed trial. You got a visit from Officer Kelly Dever. The defense implied that you influenced your testimony. Do you want to respond to that?
Your name came up during the recent Karen Reed trial. Okay, now notice here what you're seeing this is a disgust look. When your nasal area here, you get this tug here. This is disgust. Now, depending on what your mouth does, so if your mouth goes up like this in like a knowing smile, that is contempt. If it goes down, that is disgust and anger. It's a knowing sort of contempt versus a angry sort of contempt. And here what you're seeing is that knowing smile with disgust. So all of that together is contempt. Why are you seeing contempt right here? Well, let's remember the question was your name came up during the Karen Reed trial. One thing I do want to mention right here is that the biggest problem is that people forget what the truth looks like. Human beings have this desire to try to explain away inconsistencies, things that aren't right. People want things to be right. And so you try and explain away something like a look of contempt. But it's important to not forget what the truth looks like. If somebody comes up to me and says, hey, your name came up in conversation, I'd be like, really? What? How? So that is curiosity, and that's what you would expect. When you see contempt here, that means there's a tremendous amount of negative emotion that has happened to him already regarding this question. It doesn't tell us what it was, but it tells us that he's dealing with a lot emotionally. Okay, then we get the next part of this. You got a visit from Officer Kelly Dever. The defense implied that you get this superiority and dismissiveness, what you're seeing right here, that look right here. When you get contempt and it's followed up by a dismissive look, like, oh, that is, just get that out of my face. The first question that I asked myself when I saw that element of contempt in the beginning is that contempt due to the disgust of his name being misused or someone misrepresenting what he said? Because if that were the case, then you would want to clarify that publicly, regardless of whether that's your officer or if one officer is making the department look bad, which is worse, whether the police commissioner is making the department look bad or whether a beat cop is making the department look bad. He has an opportunity here to set the record straight, which if that feeling of disgust came from the record being manipulated or set awry, then he would want to engage at this point. That is a human emotion. You're going to want to engage and explain yourself if something has happened that makes you feel disgusted. But that's not what we see here. We see an element of dismissiveness, that moving back and that facial expression of dismissiveness and superiority. That is him trying to disengage. That is not wanting to explain himself, and that is a hugely problematic micro-expression at this point. So we're just going to keep watching here. And then he says, influence her testimony. So the defense implied that you influenced her testimony. Then you get this flash of anger there. So again, this doesn't tell us everything, but it gives us a very keen insight into what's going on here. Do you want to respond to that? And he says, now, before we look at his response here, let's keep a couple things in mind. The answer needs to come immediately up front. That is how honest answers come about. So, did this happen? Yes. And then I give an explanation. No, it didn't. And then I give an explanation why. You will always answer the question first if you're being completely truthful, honest, and transparent. If your answer comes at the very end, it's possible for that answer to be technically truthful, but there is still deception there. It could be omission. It means that the answer could be technically truthful, but they're not telling you the whole story. There's something there that's problematic. So remember now, the question is, the defense implied that you influenced her testimony. Do you want to respond to that? So technically, this is two questions. He has the choice of either saying, no, I don't want to respond to that, or yes, I want to respond to that, and then give the second answer, which is that he influenced her testimony.
Nothing to do with, I have nothing to do with Karen Reed. Matter of fact, I didn't even know this person was associated with the Karen Reed case.
And so he starts by saying, I have nothing to do with Karen Reed. Okay, there's a slew of problems here, actually, because number one, he doesn't answer either question. He doesn't say yes or no whether he wants to answer the question, and he doesn't say whether he had anything to do with altering Kelly Devers' testimony. Now, if he would have said, I have nothing to do with Officer Devers' testimony, that would be different. That would at least be an answer to the question. But that's not what happened here. He said, I have nothing to do with Karen Reed. Literally, what did he just tell you? He doesn't even say with the Karen Reed murder or with Karen Reed's prosecution or defense. This statement, it's problematic in how it works to dodge the question. And so I have nothing to do with Karen Reed. We have a repetition of an entire phrase. That's an indicator of deception. He said something all the way through to almost the end of the sentence, and then he didn't like where he was going with that. So this is where the mind reading comes in. I know what he was thinking here, and you may be thinking, how do you know? But he's not thinking about, I have nothing to do with the production of Ferraris. He's saying, I have nothing to do with Kelly Devers' testimony, because that was the question. And he couldn't say that. So he cut himself off, and then he repeated it so that he gave himself enough time to think of a better way to end that. And then he says, I have nothing to do with Karen Reed. That tells you that, number one, he couldn't say he has nothing to do with Kelly Devers' testimony. That's hugely problematic. That's deceptive. So that's the repetition part there. Then you have something else here. You have the wrong tense. He says, I have nothing to do with, instead of I had, because what they're talking about is very clearly in the past tense. It's testimony that already happened. So when he says, I have nothing to do with, that's an indicator of deception. You can't speak from memory if you're in present tense, because your memory of the past isn't in present tense, unless it is so shockingly traumatic and direct, something that happened directly to you. In that case, it's possible for a victim to slip into present tense if they actually go all the way back to where they're no longer even talking to you. They're just sort of hypnotized and just recounting the memory. So that's the only time when you would see that. That is not the case here. So we have numerous problems. Wrong tense, we have repeated phrase. Now we want to look at how does this right here connect with the contempt and the dismissiveness and the anger of the question altogether. Well, he's flat out dodging the question, huge deception. This already tells me that he did tell her exactly what she told Attorney Jackson that he said. We don't actually have to go any farther, because when you see contempt with dismissiveness, and then what you're seeing is a reenactment of the dismissiveness in the verbiage right here, it gives you the whole story. But we'll keep going because there's more. So then he says, matter of fact, I didn't even know this person was associated with the Karen Reed case. All right. He should have just shut it down there, because he's not under any obligation to respond. But he is an emotional man. I can tell by the amount of facial expressions that he has and the fact that his emotions carried him into this response. That's not necessarily a bad thing. When you have lives in your hands, being an emotional person is an asset. It's not a hindrance. But if you go awry somewhere in your decision-making process, it makes it very hard to lie about it. So he says, I didn't even know this person was associated with the Karen Reed case. Now, the word associated, he yells it at you. He says, I didn't even know this person was associated with the Karen Reed case. Now, I'm exaggerating that a little bit, but
Associated with the Karen Reed case.
When you get that vocal inflection, and I'm hitting everything here. I'm hitting micro expressions. I'm hitting linguistics, which is your tone and pitch. This inflection here means that this is the problem in his mind. He's sort of arguing with himself over what he's saying, and he yells the word associated. Well, I mean, you get an increase in the volume, actually, of his voice. So we notice that the word associated is very problematic for him. In fact, it's a lie. Actually, that's where the deception is, where he says, I didn't know this person was associated. So he absolutely did know. You know this based on the linguistics. And then he says, I didn't know is a reduction of commitment. So that phrase, anytime somebody is telling you, well, I didn't know this, the question isn't, what didn't you know? The question is, what do you know? And so when you start explaining things you don't know, that's called a reduction of commitment. It means that I am finding ways to reduce my commitment to what I'm telling you. And then he says, this person, instead of saying Kelly Dever. Why? Why is that a big deal? Well, you see that, and your first inclination might be to think, well, he doesn't want to use her name in public because it's disrespectful or it's unprofessional. But then you have to ask yourself, is that the case? And that is absolutely not the case here. He was asked a question directly about her. If he is going to set the record straight, this answer should have come out something along the lines of, I had a conversation with Officer Kelly Dever, and in that conversation, I didn't tell her do the right thing. Or he would say, I did tell her to do the right thing, but that was in the context of this. There's no attempt at being transparent in this answer here. This is all about look here, look there. And he says this person, that is distancing himself, of disassociating himself. Now, if you've seen distancing when he had that look of superiority and dismissiveness where he moved back a little bit, if you see body language of somebody trying to distance themselves, either starting to turn away or they look away like this, or that look of dismissiveness, if you're seeing distancing in both the verbiage and the body language, that's a very clear sign that that person is under extreme duress at that point. They are trying to get away. They see you and your question as a huge threat to them. And so they're trying to put distance or barriers in between. So ultimately, what do we take away from this very first sentence? I have nothing to do with is a lie. That is absolute deception from top to bottom. Another thing I want to mention here is when he says, I didn't even know, that's factually incorrect. There's no possible way, unless he is just the most out of touch police commissioner on the planet, there's no way that he didn't know that one of his officers was going to testify in the Karen Reed trial. His claim that I didn't even know that is a method of distancing himself that sounded good in his head, but that's not even deception detection. This is just verifying information. What he said is just not factually accurate. And so we do want to notice that as well.
You know, I have an organization full of over 3,000 people, and we support all our folks. And the reality is that, you know, I get information passed on, whether it's people are high or low, and I encourage everyone, right?
The next thing he says is, you know, I have an organization filled of over 3,000 people, and we support all our folks. And the reality is that, you know, I get information passed on, whether those people are high or low, and I encourage everyone, right? Okay, you can tell when you see him talking that this is a tangent. It's a distancing technique. That's what a tangent is. When you are supposed to be answering this direct line of questioning, and then you go this way, you're putting distance between the question and your answer. So he is on a tangent, and he's verbally trying to distance himself from the question and hopefully get the reporter who's asking the questions off track. Now he says, which is a reduction of commitment here. So right off the bat, he knows that he's being deceptive by trying to go on this tangent. So he says, I have an organization filled with over 3,000 people and we support our folks. And the reality is that so he says, again, this is another reduction of commitment, which means he's about to do something. The first was before the tangent. That is a deception technique. The next is going to be before something here. And so let's see what he says. He says, I get information passed on whether those people are high or low, and I encourage everyone, right? Now he's asking, does that make sense? Did what I say when he says right at the end, he says, is that a good answer? And he shouldn't be. He should be telling you the answer, not asking you if that answer is okay. So what's really interesting here, he's trying to give you generic information that is tangential to the question, and he says something that is truthful. And that allows him to reduce his stress for a second. But notice what he says. I get information passed on, whether those people are high or low. Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't he just say that he didn't even know that Kelly Dever was testifying? So he gets information passed on whether those people are high or low. Those two statements are directly in contrast with each other. He says, I know everything that's going on, whether the people are high or low level, except I had no idea that this was happening, that she was testifying in the Karen Reed trial. So he got lost in what he thought sounded good and didn't realize. He wasn't trying to contradict himself. He didn't realize that he contradicted himself right there. And then he says, if
you're going to work here and you belong here, then we're going to encourage you. I have no idea what they're talking about with Karen Reed. It had nothing to do with Karen Reed. No discussion.
If you want to work here and you belong here, then we're going to encourage you. I have no idea what they're talking about with Karen Reed. I had nothing to do with Karen Reed. No discussion, but now let's just notice this. He says, if you want to work here and you belong here, then we're going to encourage you. Okay, I think that's a bit of a confession right there. He sort of slipped into the mode of when he was talking to her right there, which is normal. That's called leakage. That happens when you are superimposing the real memory on top of a fabrication. So you're going to accidentally pull from that real memory. Your mind simply meshes reality with your fabrication, and then you start to leak the truth into what you're saying. And so if you want to work here and you belong here, then we're going to encourage you, okay? If you don't want to work here and you don't belong here and you don't play the game and you don't toe the line, then we're not going to encourage you and we're not going to support you. And that is what he literally just said.
You tell Officer Dever to do the right thing.
I didn't know she was even associated with that case. So, I don't know. I was struck. Like, what do I have to do with the Karen Reed race? I never have said those words together. And so the fact is, it's much to do about nothing. We have employees here that we have to develop and encourage and do things, and I do that for tons of our employees.
And let's see, did you tell Officer Dever to do the right thing? Okay, so the reporter initially he got resistance. Commissioner Cox didn't even want to talk, and now he worked his way in and he hits him with the direct question. So let's see what happens when he hits him with the accusation, with the direct question. He says, I didn't know she was even associated with that case. He says, I didn't know she was even associated with that case. Excuse me? Didn't just right up here, didn't you say that that you get all of the information, whether the people are high level or low? Okay, so him not knowing that Officer Dever was involved in the Karen Reed case is just a nonsensical statement. I didn't know is, again, it's a negative statement. It's both a negative statement and a reduction of commitment. I didn't know she was even associated with that case. It's just a nonsense statement. But then he continues to talk. That's his biggest downfall here, is that he continues to talk when he shouldn't. Now he says, so, which is an explanatory statement. Which is a reduction of commitment. I don't, which is a negative statement. So we have an explanatory plus negative. So you know, I don't know. We have a repeating I don't, which is an indicator of deception. And then he says, I don't know, which is another reduction of commitment. Okay, tracking? Then he says, I was struck. Okay, we have repeating I is absolute deception. And I was is another repetitive phrase there. Was struck. Like is a reduction of commitment. What do I have to do with the Karen Reed case? Well, you're the police commissioner, the Boston police commissioner. So you either have everything to do with the Karen Reed case or you have nothing to do with the Karen Reed case. But you shouldn't be asking the question. So how many indicators do we have here? We technically have 6 indicators just in this seven indicators just in this sentence right here. So this is going to be big problems. What do I have to do with the Karen Reed case? I have never, that's a 8th indicator here. I have never said those words together. Sorry, this is really funny. I've never said all of those words together. Like he's basically insinuating that he has over the course of his life said each one of those words independently, but he's never combined them all together in that way. That's just his brain in panic mode, actually. And so the fact is, so again, that's a explanatory statement followed by the fact is, which is a reduction of commitment, which is another reduction of commitment. It's much to do about nothing, which is funny because it's supposed to be much ado about nothing. It's just a misquote. We have employees here that we have to develop and encourage. No one's asking about that. And things, and I do that. And then you get this look of disgust for tons of our employees. And then he backs away. So we got disgust, we have distancing, again, just like we had in the beginning. We have like 100 indicators of deception in here. And so what is the question? Did you tell Officer Dever to do the right thing? And you have a ton of distance. You have distancing and omission, which are deception, which tells you that the truth is yes. So what do we know here? We know that, yes, he did say those words exactly, do the right thing, because he's lying when he says he has never said those words together. And then you get a reenactment of the disgust and the backing away. You have multiple indicators of deception through body language, through micro expressions, and through the verbiage. And what does all of that tell you? It tells you that, yeah, that is exactly what he said, and that is exactly what he meant. He did have the option here of saying, technically, yes, I did say those words, but the rest of that conversation was, I know some people may have told you to go lie on the stand. I don't want you to do that. I want you to tell exactly the truth as you know it. I want you to do the right thing. If that is what he said, then that is what he would have just said here. But if he wasn't doing the right thing, then you're going to get deception, and that's what you get. Now, do you feel that you were inappropriately brought into this as some sort of boogeyman? And then he says,
that you were inappropriately drawn into this as some sort of boogeyman?
That case is over, and we've got a lot of other stuff to talk about. I have nothing to do with Karen Reed. I was in the state of Michigan. So.
That case is over. So that you don't really get a whole lot from the end here, because what the reporter does is he actually offers an out here. Like, were you brought into this unnecessarily, unjustly by the defense as a boogeyman, like as someone to blame for something? But he doesn't take that out because his mind is overwhelmed at this point. And so he says that case is over. And, we've got a lot of other stuff to talk about. I have nothing to do with Karen Reed. I was in the state of Michigan. That's just really weird. So you see, he's actually like practically pushing himself away and walking away, which is again distancing. But he changes this from I had nothing to do with Officer Dever's testimony to a statement that is very directly saying I didn't actively implicate Karen Reed because, and then he gives you an alibi, because I was in the state of Michigan. I'm not saying that he was involved in it. He obviously wasn't. But the idea that he was so overwhelmed that he threw that in there means that he feels very dirty, very implicated in all of this. And then he ends up just ending the entire interview with an alibi, and he just walks away. He basically forcefully breaks the interview apart and walks away. It's very interesting. He is, like I said in the beginning, he's an emotional man. I have no idea what kind of leader he is. It would not surprise me if he was a fantastic leader to his police officers, his troops. That is the kind of personality that says, I'm going to protect you. Everything that is going to come at you, I'm going to take that on head on myself. That is a great leadership quality. However, if you go awry in that, if you're friends with somebody who's doing something wrong, that personality, that type of personality, it switches from focusing very heavily on always doing the right thing to putting yourself into a situation where you're not used to doing the wrong thing. And you just have an absolute meltdown on camera, which is what we see here. So my analysis at the end of the day here is I'm not saying anything about Commissioner Cox as far as his character, his personality, or his leadership ability. It wouldn't surprise me if he's a very good commissioner, but he was deceptive here, without a doubt. So we have looked at his microexpressions, we've looked at his body language, we've looked at his linguistics, and we've looked at his verbiage, and they all scream the same thing, which is deception. All right, so there you go. If you marry this up with Kelly Dever, what does that tell us? It tells me that Kelly Dever was in fact told by the commissioner to do the right thing under no misleading circumstances. She knew what she was told to do, and he, unfortunately for him, unfortunately for Kelly Dever, has the entire weight of the entire Boston Police Department behind him. So what is she supposed to do at that point? I don't know. I mean, the right thing to do would be to quit and say, I'm not going to be a part of this, and then to go and testify. However, not everyone is willing to sacrifice themselves to do the right thing, and Kelly Dever wasn't. So she wanted to play the game, and instead of potentially being harmed by this offer that she couldn't refuse, she chose to take the path of reward and do the wrong thing in order to try to benefit herself. So yeah, we have deception all over the place. Kelly Dever was deceptive. She was put in a terrible situation. She did try to cover that up, but it did absolutely happen exactly the way that Attorney Jackson said that it did. And that's it. I hope this answered some questions for you. And let me know if you like me doing the micro expressions, the verbal linguistics, the body language, and the verbiage all combined. I think it probably gives you a clearer picture when you see more than just the verbiage, that you see the other indicators and it gives you that whole picture. I understand that. It just takes a lot longer and we get through a lot less. It's a good thing this was basically just one question. But yeah, let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next video.